Welcome to Reco12. I'm Justin, your host and a beautifully imperfect, stumbling, bumbling child of an absolutely powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict living in the miracle of recovery. Reco12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers are members of various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, thus showing the common threads of recovery no matter our addiction or affliction. As this is the final Reco12 speaker meeting of the year 2024, I just want to thank you all for another wonderful year and wish you all a very happy holidays and a happy new year. Today is meeting number 303 of the Reco12 speaker meeting, and today's speaker is Daniel B. Daniel's topic today is ninth step amends with myself and with my higher power, and I look forward to hearing that message here in just a few minutes, but first for a little bit of business. Reco12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, just hang out and learn and grow with us. You can check out the other podcasts. You can find it at reco12.com. That's reco12.com. Or you can join our social media communities, and I'll put those links in the chat here and in the show notes of the podcast. Reco12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Thanks to all of our spearheads, past, present, and future. And a special thanks this week goes out to Melissa, Sirata, Daniel, and Elizabeth. And we're super grateful for these generous donations. If you out there also feel a desire to become a spearhead and support this cause, visit reco12.com/support. Click on the links that'll be in the chat here or in the show notes of the podcast for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support, not just financially, but with your word of mouth, makes a difference in keeping us able to share these messages of recovery. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for today, Daniel B., and give a little background on him. And he sent these in his own words, so I'm going to read them as if I'm Daniel. I grew up in a nuclear family filled with addicts and alcoholics. In 1995, I began a long-term relationship with an alcoholic and sex addict. That relationship and eventual marriage led me on a journey with stops in many forms of institutions and hospitals. By the grace of God, I attended my first Al-Anon meeting on July 19th, 2004, and my first S-Anon meeting on January 13th of 2010. In 2023, for a reason I don't yet see, my S-Anon friends gave me the name Yodanon. I am proud of being named after the wisest, non-conference approved Jedi Knight. Finding my voice through public speaking and serving others helps me earn my emotional sobriety one day at a time. All right, Daniel, the floor is yours. Take it away.
All right, I turn that on. Good morning. I am Dan B. Today I live in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I am very grateful to be here today. As I mentioned in the introduction, my friends call me Yodanon, and I like to think that has something to do with the fact that I've never met an addict that I didn't want to spend time with. I love providing infrastructure for addicted people, and I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but I certainly have the history to prove it. I was born in a home with addictions. My father was a drinker. My father still is a drinker. He is an old man today. The drinking, he was able to be functional, but however, his functionality often left out responsibilities with children. I was born more than a decade after my closest sibling, and in fact, my oldest sibling was old enough to drive my mother to the hospital when I was born. When the sibling who is nearest in age to me was dethroned from his position as the baby in the family, he took out his physical aggressions on me. And a man who's 12 years older than someone, so when I was 6 and he was 18, he could pack quite a wallop physically on me. And I have a history of also physical abuse, which in my family is not really talked about and is also quite shameful. My family on the outside always looked great. I come from somewhat of a notable family. I have a very business successful father, and my brothers continue to work with him in industry today. I knew that I had to get away from all of that as soon as I could. And as soon as I was old enough to move away, I did, and I went to college far away. I am often reminded of the adage that hurt people hurt people. And a lot of what I remember from my childhood is being hurt by the people who were around me. I wasn't old enough yet to realize that they were hurting me because that's what they knew. They knew how to hurt, and they themselves were hurting. So I went to college, and when I was 21 years old, I developed a intimate relationship with an addicted person. And today I'm 50, and that relationship ran its course. And over nearly 3 decades, I really learned about taking care of a person with an alcohol addiction, of a person with a food addiction, of a person with a sex addiction. And I learned, I learned, I think the thing that I learned more than anything is that filling up, trying to fill up the darkness of those addictions with my own personality was never going to be successful. In 2004, and I'm going to tell my talk today from the perspective of both an Al-Anon and an S-Anon. In 2004, I attended my first Al-Anon meeting, and I did that because I took an addicted friend to a bar, bought him a whole bunch of alcohol, and as he was coming home, he was a little bit too drunk to walk, and he injured himself very badly, badly enough that he needed to spend a couple of nights in the intensive care. I realized that I had had one drink and bought him perhaps 15, and that there was something in myself that needed to be not just with this addicted person, but somehow to do damage to him. I mean, I'm potent and destructive. And I had heard about Al Anon, of course, through my life. And I have family members who have drug and alcohol addictions. And I thought, let's give it a try. I showed up and basically spent my first 2 months in Al Anon in tears, and then finally started healing. A few years later, the betrayals in my marriage started. And I didn't really know what sex addiction was at the time, but I did learn that it had a profound impact on me. In SA and S-Anon, you'll often hear people say, "We are the last houses on the recovery street." And it's largely because no one really wants to be an SA and no one really wants to be an S-Anon. You'll stop AA, NA, all of those are more readily acceptable. But when you start talking about the sex stuff, it gets a little bit more difficult. And so I came into S-Anon through the side door of Al-Anon. It became very clear that I needed a safe space to talk about the physical betrayals that were going on in my marriage that was defective. And it also became clear that in Al-Anon, there wasn't exactly the right forum for that. I attended my first S-Anon meeting in 2010, and it was in a church basement in Arlington, Virginia. And in one room was an SA meeting with a bunch of men, and in the room next door were all of their wives and me. And I would like to say that I immediately found an S-Anon home there, but I did not. In fact, I attended that meeting off and on for several years, but it wasn't until 2022, when a series of betrayals happened, that I met a man called Kevin who had really done some work on making S-Anon a comfortable place for men. Today, I am proud of my Al-Anon program. I'm proud of my S-Anon program. But in working my 12 steps with my S-Anon sponsor this time, I got to the ninth step and I realized that in all of the times that I had worked my steps, I had never really done a good ninth step. And as an Anon, I am absolutely willing to go out there and apologize to the world. I am willing to go to every addicted person I've ever met and be responsible for other people's problems. But that's not what a good ninth step is about. And the first person I had to put on my ninth step amends this time was myself. And the reason I had to put myself on there first is because I also needed to make an amends to my higher power. And just like having a dirty house that you don't invite guests to, I felt like I needed to do some cleaning of my own house before I could really invite God in. And I had a profound relationship with God up to this point, but it became clear that I was not yet ready and not yet able to let God seep into every bit of my being. And part of that was just because I had to clear out some of the old wreckage of the things that I had done. Now, I often, when I work with my sponsees and I talk about the ninth step, the very first conversation, especially on the Anon side, is, my sponsees want to start figuring out how they can get forgiveness for what they've done. And we have to talk a lot about the difference between an amend and forgiveness. And forgiveness is something that someone else gives you. And one of the things that I've learned in my own Anon program is that I can't control what other people do. And if someone chooses to forgive me or not, has nothing to do with me. That's in fact none of my business. And a good amend can be made whether or not there's forgiveness on the other side. There is one exception to this rule, though, and that exception is when you're making an amend to yourself, you can forgive yourself. You can forgive other people and you can forgive yourself, but there is nothing you can do to require forgiveness from anyone else. And that's actually not what I think the amending process is about. So I started the process of making the amends to myself. And the first thing I had to do was forgive myself for what I had done to get myself into the position that I had gotten myself into. Now, somehow, God didn't give me any addictions. I'm not addicted to things. I'm not addicted to food. I'm not addicted to processes. I'm not addicted to substances. And I'm not entirely sure why that's the case. But in my co-addiction, I am absolutely able to get in and screw things up. Like I mentioned before, I started Al-Anon meetings because I bought enough alcohol for an addicted person that he couldn't walk home and he fell and he injured himself badly enough to need the intensive care unit. I am able to be every bit as destructive as somebody with an addiction, and sometimes even more so. So, as I looked at my ninth step, and as I looked at the wreckage of the life I had, and by the time I got to my ninth step, I had been separated in my marriage. I was living in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which is not where I'm from. It's where I moved to in order to fix a broken marriage. And the geographical cure worked just as well as any of the other geographical cures that anyone in this room might have tried. In fact, what it did is really acted as the catalyst to make things fall apart really fast. And I started the process when, because of a series of events, I actually didn't have a place to stay. And it's not just the addicts that run out of places to stay. So I was in a very I was staying in basically a basement. It was an Airbnb. It was not clean. It was not particularly safe. It had no windows. A lot of things were going wrong for me. And I had gotten to the point with my sponsor that we agreed I was going to start the process of this amends to myself. And I remember the feeling of utter helplessness of my situation, but also knowing that I had done a lot to get myself there. And so I started the process of first forgiveness. And forgiving other people is usually justifiable for me. And I've forgiven a lot of people for doing a lot of things. Forgiving myself, that produced a cotton mouth every time. And I finally got to the point where I could accept the place I was. And the acceptance for me was the first part of the forgiveness. And I'd like to say that I have really waved a wand and forgiven myself for the course of my life as it was. but that wouldn't be the truth. The truth is, I work on it every day, but I have given myself enough forgiveness that I could start looking at the things that I needed to amend. And it's last night I saw a professional theater production of A Christmas Carol. And there's a point at which Ebenezer Scrooge, and I know this isn't conference approved, but there's a point at which Ebenezer Scrooge is standing looking at his headstone. And he asked the spirit if there was a way he could wipe away what was written on the stone. And as I was watching Ebenezer Scrooge say that, and I was thinking about this talk that I'm giving today, I thought that, it's one day at a time and we live in the day for sure. But the trajectory I was headed on was perhaps a headstone that I didn't really want either. And so the amendments that I started making are, in fact, investments in a future and to perhaps save a legacy. So I started looking at myself. And of course, I did a fourth step. And this time around, I did a pretty good fourth step. And I started looking at my character defects, and I have spent a lot of time in the seventh step. The seventh step is where we ask our higher power to remove our defects with humility. And the only thing we have to do is ask. We don't necessarily have to take any constructive steps to remove them. We just trust that our higher power will, if we are humble enough, in order to allow those defects to be removed. So I looked at my character defects, and the biggest ones I have are defects of self-pity, defects of abandonment, fear of being alone, and of course trying to fill up that God-sized hole that we all have with anything but God. And I have tried to fill my God-sized hole with people, places, things, and situations for my whole life. And as I realized what I have done, I also started looking at my mind, my heart, my body, and my soul. And so I kind of took this amends to myself and I separated it into four categories. And the first category is my mind and where I had allowed my intellect to take me. And my intellect had taken me to some really dark spaces. In fact, through life with a sex addict and through life with alcoholics and drug addicts around me, I had entertained quite a bit of dark thinking. And I had found myself in sexual situations that made me ashamed of myself. I had found myself in dirty bars looking for someone to heal. I had found myself with gambling addicts. I had found myself with shopping addicts. I had found myself with all array of addicts. And the thing that I used my intellect for was to learn about their addictions and ways that I could save them. And that is not what I perceive my higher power to have given me my intellect for. I think my intellect is actually best served looking for my higher power. And so the amendment I needed to make on that part was, Dan, where are you taking your intellect? Are you learning more about people with porn addictions? Are you pain shopping to find out where your qualifier is spending time? Are you taking your intellect to another gambling hall to see how people are using gambling to fill in spaces in their own psychologies? And then I had to turn that intellect around and I had to turn it to my higher power. And as I chased darkness, learning about BDSM fantasies, learning about different ways that people abuse drugs, learning about all of those things, I had to get rid of all of that because that's only darkness. And there is not enough of my soul to feed that darkness. In fact, the more I feed the darkness, the hungrier I get. And I had to turn that around and I had to point my intellect at my higher power. And I had to let my intellect start being flooded with light. And I use this light and dark reference a lot in the reference to my own amends, because I have learned that the light feeds me and I feed the darkness. And I can't produce enough nourishment for the dark. And the smallest drop of light can give me some hope. And with hope, I have a lot. So that's my intellect. Now, my heart space. Where had I taken my heart? Well, I had invested my heart in a marriage to somebody who would betray me. At one point, all of my close quote unquote friends and acquaintances had an addiction of some sort. And I had really taken all of my emotional center and invested it in people with addictions. And again, I can't feed enough emotion to an addict to fill him or her up. There's just not enough there. And again, I ran into a space where my emotions ran dry. My heart was emptier and emptier, and I was giving away what I didn't have. And you can't feed anything with an empty cupboard. So I thought, well, what do I do with my emotions in order to start refilling this heart space that has been so infected with darkness? And I turned my heart space around and again pointed it to my higher power. And I started asking my higher power to introduce me to some people who I might like to spend time with. And I never expected my higher power to show up in such a wonderful way. And actually, what's happened is today I look around and very few of my friends are addicted people. And if they are addicted people, they're deeply in recovery. And in fact, the kind of recovery that they're in is the kind that fills up their heart space. And so I'm suddenly sloshing around in all of this emotional sobriety and physical sobriety. And that fills up my heart space. And again, that feeds me. And here I had spent my whole life trying to feed dark things. And I don't have to do that anymore. And I pointed my heart at my higher power and asked my higher power to introduce me to people, places, things, and situations that would nourish that. Now, my body, that's another thing that I had to make amends to. Where had I been putting my body? I had always wanted to be the guy whose brain was just on a stick. I had lost very much relationship with my body. And part of that was being physically beaten when I was a boy. And so there was a high pain tolerance. I have quite a high pain tolerance. And there was also a little bit of a disassociation from a body. I had needed to escape my body in some ways. Now, when you are married to a person with a sex addiction, being disassociated with your body is pretty handy because you wind up, again, entertaining darknesses with your physical form. And there are physical things that where myself, my body has been present that I'm ashamed of. And I can't change those things. But what I can do is going forward, I can forgive myself because remember, forgiveness is one of those things we can give ourselves. We can give it to other people, but I work on giving it to myself first. Um, and I'm going to take a little side break here and talk about one of my first Al-Anon meetings. I was at actually the Yellow Church at the White House the Yellow Church across the street from the White House in Washington, D.C., in the basement. And I had finished sharing about how I had an ear infection and couldn't go get my ear infection treated because I had to go do something for an alcoholic. And at the end of the meeting, an elderly woman, a short woman with very bright eyes, and I would expect she's no longer alive today, but if she is, God bless her, pulled me aside and said, "Young man, I need you to repeat something to me." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "After me, you come first." And I couldn't say it. And she repeated it. And finally, she got me to say, "After me, you come first." And that has served as a drumbeat mantra for my program, for myself, in my Anon addictions for almost 20 years now. After me, you come first. And the reason why it's important to insert that right now is I'm talking about the things that I had done with my physical body that had really been for someone else's needs. I had put myself in places that I shouldn't have been. I have seen some darknesses that should have made me blind. But instead, today, I can amend that. I can forgive myself for where I've allowed my body to be. I'm healthier today than I perhaps ever have been. I started exercising. I started eating very well. I saw doctors to treat some endocrine issues I had. And today, with an amended sense of myself, I'm not going to put my body in those places I used to put them. I'm not going to go to a sex club or a diseased bar or any of those places because my body matters and it's a good body. And in my particular brand of spirituality, it even might look like God's. So I have to take very good care of that. And so I've amended where I put my intellect, my mind. I've amended where I've put my emotions, my heart. I've started taking good care of my body, and I know that I'm not going to pollute what I've built in my own body. And so that leads me to the soul question. What am I going to do with my soul? And the only thing I can do with my soul is invite God in. And as today, I have an amended sense of myself. I can invite God in. And I'm a pro at putting words in God's mouth. I'm one of those guys that always used to know what God wanted. And the fact is, I had no idea what God wanted, not the first clue. And so at the beginning of this year, I sat down and my actual action amends to my higher power was to read the scripture from my faith tradition end to end. And I'm at the end of I've 6 days left in the year, I guess, and or 5 days left, and so I've got five more readings left, and then I will have read all of the faith-based writings from my tradition. And I have learned a lot about what my higher power actually thinks and wants, and a lot of it had nothing to do with what I had in mind to start with. But with those keys, I can let God into my soul now. And God always was in my soul. But instead of fighting the rush of that higher power in and trying to insulate what I was ashamed of showing to God, today, with the forgiveness I've given myself, with the amendments I've made to myself, I can now amend that relationship with my God, and I can let God into me from tip to toe. And God always knew what was there, but I wasn't always ready to show it. And with those ninth step amends that I've made to myself and to my higher power in place, making amends to other people that I had harmed became a radically different operation. And it wasn't out trying to achieve forgiveness from people because I know that I can't get forgiveness. It was amending things that had gone wrong with people and knowing that with my higher power infecting my soul tip to bottom, with me putting my emotions and my intellect and my body in the right spaces and facing the light that nourishes me, not the darkness that I can't feed enough, suddenly the amends to other people start feeling real. And a good amends can be a phone call that you get hung up on. You know, that can still be a good amends. I don't need forgiveness. I can't achieve forgiveness, but I can change what I've done that hurt other people. And there's a lot written about how to do the amends to other people, but constructing an amends to oneself, there's not a lot written about that. And it took me 20 years in the program to actually get it done. So I think I think that it's difficult. I think it's important. In fact, I think it's critical because at the end of my life, I will leave this body alone. I will leave it all by myself. And when I do that, I want to make sure that I don't have regrets for what I have done. The amends process that I've done to myself is critical, important, and I think that actually brings me to the end of my 25 minutes. Um, when I work with my own sponsees on this, I actually have them categorize. Um, I have them categorize things that they have done, that they know they have done to themselves, that they don't like about themselves. And when a sponsee starts going down the list of things they don't like about themselves, I try to be very careful with them and not push it too hard, because the point here is not to destroy the ego; it's to help refresh it in some particular ways. And then we do look at things from the perspective of where your mind, your heart, and your body have been. The higher power, changes from person to person. We all have a power of our understanding. And today, I will say, because I have done this and I've begun the process of learning to forgive myself, and because I have pointed myself squarely at the light, those soul hungers are gone. And my soul hungers were profound. And I am today, nourished. And for that, I am very grateful for the amends I've done for myself. So thanks for letting me share today. Thanks for letting me talk about my ninth step amends to myself and my ninth step amends to my higher power. I would love to take questions on this. And my name is Dan from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I am a grateful recovering Al-Anon, and I'm a grateful recovering S-Anon today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate your share. And I've written down several questions to everybody here in the live audience. If you have a question for Dan, please type it in the chat. I will get to it as they come along. If you'd like to remain completely anonymous and not have me read your first name, send me a direct message with your question rather than in the general chat, and we'll get to those. Dan, I want to start off with a question that I have here that you talked about the process of accepting yourself and who you are, what you have done, that acceptance being vital in order to make amends with yourself. What did that process look like I mean, was it like an immediate, oh, I can now accept myself, or what did that look like once you realized that truth?
Well, so the process started first with my own first step. And, I kind of boil the first step down to controlling, lying, and denying. And I have huge control issues. I'm not a huge liar, but I am a great big denier. And denials are just forms of lies. And in that first step, I had to start, I had to start accepting where I was and what I was up to. Um, as a part of the first step, and as a part of accepting where I was and where I'd done, I had to also start admitting that I was placing myself in other people's first steps over and over and over again. And realizing that I was living a life of living in other people's first steps, living in other people's unmanageabilities, as well as my own, I had to stop denying that. And it wasn't a light switch. It took a long time. And my control issues are pretty profound. And I had to get to the point where I wasn't trying to all the time control control others. And so it took a long time is the basic answer to that. But the heart of that for me is in the first step. And admitting my unmanageability, and also admitting that I love to put myself in the middle of other people's unmanageabilities. And that's a choice. And admitting that that's the choice, and I had to start accepting the consequences of my own actions.
Yeah, something my wife often says to me is, "Hey, that's not my circus. Those aren't my monkeys." Basically, I don't want involvement in that. But it sounds like, "Hey, there's the circus. I'm going to jump in and play and try and figure out the monkeys." Does that make sense? Do you
Yeah,
identify
for
with that?
sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, from the Anon perspective, another chestnut that's a big part of my program is just because I know where the beehive is does not mean I need to put my hand inside of it. And
Yeah.
and that's always been my life. I have uh, as with an alcoholic father, I spent a lot of time trying to get his attention. And ultimately, the way I learned I could get his attention was by starting to live in his first step. And I was trained for that at a very young age. Now, I can also retrain myself, and that's what I've been working on.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dan. All right, next question is an anonymous question from one of our members here in the audience. This person says, "What do you say when people insist you cannot make a step 9 to yourself?" And then they go on and they say, "As an Al-Anon, an ACA, and a CODA person, it's been huge for me for that person to make amends with themselves, but many say that it's not okay." What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that my program is my business and your program is your business. And I appreciate that you don't think I can do that, but I think I did. And, mind your own business. It's, my side of the street's pretty clean. If you like my garden, do it my way. If you don't like my garden, do it your way. But keep your side of the street clean, and that's it.
No, that's that's pretty. I love that. It's pretty direct. When you said that, my initial response, and this is maybe the addict, maybe it's the anon in me, whatever it is, was defensiveness. How dare you tell me how to run my program? Talk to me about how you deal with that when the initial response is defensiveness when there's something that comes your way.
Uh, so I when I find a defensive response, it's usually misplaced because I defend the wrong things. The things that I need to defend, I don't. And my own circus and my own monkeys, and I don't want to pretend, those aren't my monkeys and that's not my circus. That doesn't mean I don't have my own circus. And I certainly do. I got my own monkeys for sure. Um, but when I get an immediate visceral response that I have to be defensive right now, I have to, first of all, Q-tip, quit taking it personally, because there's something personal here that's actually not what's really happening. I need to back off. And today, the people that I'm spending time with will often remind me, hey, don't swing back. You don't need to swing back. And I, uh, and I don't. Very often, I don't need to swing back. And so it's just a mindfulness. And I know the process. I know what I have done. I know what I'm capable of doing. And I also know that when I get that immediate, get out of my face moment, it's usually misplaced.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dan. You know, uh, I think I've heard this before, that Q-tip, quit taking it personally. But maybe I've got some anon in me because as soon as you said that, I had three people that I work with that as sponsees that I went, oh, that person needs to hear that, and I want to get in their business. So not coach me, but help me understand how I can share that with others without getting in their business.
uh, well, the way I do that is I figure I can say anything once. And if I say it twice, it's usually because I'm trying to control, deny, or lie. And then I've got a first step problem. And if I'm, yeah, it's always, and I always share things from not always, that's not true. I try to always share things from my own perspective. Uh, in my experience, if I can quit taking things personally, I can quit misplacing my defensive structures. And that helps me.
Yeah, thank you. I love that concept. I can share something once, but if I share it twice or more times, I'm probably trying to control and get out of my side of the street. That's very powerful for me. All right. So another question I have for you, or based on something you shared, you talked about your mind. There's not enough in your soul to beat the darkness, and that came through in several of those four different aspects of self that you had to look at. Talk to us a little bit about that. Um, how I and you are just not enough to fight off the darkness, no matter how, smart or caring or physically strong or whatever we may be.
Yeah, the darkness is powerful and it's potent. And to me, it's seductive, right? It's that space that I feel like I can outwit. And I've got, I've got a pretty big intellect. I've got a pretty good emotional center. And I like to think that, maybe partly because I'm a guy, I don't know, but I like to think that I can beat stuff. And also, I don't like to be alone. I have been abandoned so many times that I expect it. And so on my own, it's like when MacGyver drops out of the ceiling, right? And he stops 3 inches from the floor on the cable and gets the thing and zooms back up. I want to be able to do that. And that's not real. What's actually real is, I need to stay away from the dark stuff. I need to fill myself up with things that feed me instead of me feeding things. You can feed children, you can feed the elderly people who can't feed themselves, or the sick people or infirmed or whatever. But a person who's making bad decisions for themselves, I don't need to learn about that. I don't need to feed that. I don't need to give my any of my abilities to that, because I don't have enough. Because I'm not going to stop 3 inches from the ground on the cable and get zipped back up to the ceiling. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fall flat on the floor and just break myself and whatever I fall on. And so I got to stop doing that. And instead, I need to give up the fantasy that I can control things, that I can fix people, that I can, get somebody's credit fixed, I got to give up all those fantasies, because actually, I can barely take care of myself most of the time. And on the days that I do a good job taking care of myself, there's a little bit left over. But to be honest, the thing that I found that can care for me is a power greater than myself. And I had to give it there. I had to. I had no other choice. When I came back into S-Anon in a big way in 2022, I was broken. I was just broken. And what I was doing didn't work. There was no MacGyver. There was no museum I was trying to raid. There was, it was brokenness. You know, I, my relationships, all of them were in tatters. For a period, I didn't have a place to stay. I mean, what actually is more unmanageable than that? So that's the darkness. Unmanageability is the darkness. And I can't go there anymore.
I think building on that, you mentioned that, you know, prior to this, prior to recovery, if you looked around, all of your friends and relations were addicts who were maybe not working a good program. And now, as you are in recovery and working a good program in your own life, you have your the people that you surround yourself with have changed to people who either aren't a mess or people who are working a good program. Talk to us about the importance of and how that change happens. Is it a physical change with people you hang around with, or is it those people changing themselves? What does that look like?
Well, for me, there's the old chestnut: when you come in the program, all you have to do is change everything. And I have found that I actually didn't have to change a lot of stuff. God did it for me. And some of the stuff happened on a schedule that I was not interested in following, but it just, things start giving out. You can, uh, as an Anon, I couldn't support all of the addicted people around me anymore. It was done. There was no way forward. And God just started taking a lot of things away from me, and in a hurry. And today I am starting to put things back in, and the pieces fit together so much better than they used to. It's amazing. Like, it's like a set of Legos that's perfectly made, as opposed to the set of fake Legos that's made in a factory that doesn't have good dye or something. It's everything just starts snapping in place. And what it looks like is, yeah, my physical situation where I'm living. I, I'm living in a different way in a different place than I did before. The addicted people, they don't necessarily want me around. I'm no fun anymore. If I, I mean, I'm literally the Al-Anon that used to go to a bar and buy a guy I didn't know drinks because, I don't know why. That's in my fourth and fifth step and between me and my sponsor and God, frankly. But the those people don't want me around anymore. I'm talking about light. What's more fun to someone that's about ready to inject a drug than to have some recovering anon talk about facing the light? That goes nowhere. So and also relationships with people who I can't change, like my family of origin, those relationships are changing too, because I'm stopping the need to get their attention or get their permission, because I have a higher power now that's filled me up, and my higher power is the one that gives me directions, and that's all I need.
Thank you so much, Dan. All right, another question from an anonymous attendee. This person says, my ego tends to lace every thought. I'll shut myself down incessantly when I'm trying to, quote, do the right thing, telling myself, I'm just virtual signaling to myself and to God. And then again, when I notice I'm doing that, how do you stop your ego from taking the credit when it crops up like that?
um well, for myself, I have a profound sense of how it should be, right? Which is, in Freudian psychology, is your superego. But what I often have to remind myself is the way that I think it ought to be is my own opinion, and is not necessarily the truth. It's just what I think. And so when I get to the point where I have, I start beating myself down because I think that things should be a particular way, I have to give myself a break. And that's it. I just give myself a break. Dan, you're doing the best you can, and it's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. All right. The next question is a combination from something I wrote down and an anonymous question from our audience. You mentioned that, and I loved how you put this, my body has been present for things that I'm ashamed of. And this person says, what's the process of forgiving yourself for the stuff you did that you do not respect or that you're ashamed of? What is that process for that?
Oh, it's slow. It's slow. I wish I could say that there was just a magic switch. But I have to remember that $10 emotions aren't necessarily bad. And shame is one of those emotions that's difficult. And being ashamed can be show stopping for me. But I have to remember that I did the best I could at the time. No one required me to be perfect. I required myself to be perfect on my own time. That was my own decision. Nobody said to me, you have to be perfect. My higher power never, ever gave me a message that said I was required to be perfect. And so I just remember to myself that I did what I could do at the time. I thought I was doing the right things at the time. I know today that I was not. And when the shame becomes particularly difficult, I remind myself that my higher power can take that from me and hold on to it if I ask. Because shame shows up in my fourth step a lot. And there is a lack of humility in being ashamed. Because the shame spiral often starts when I think that I should have been better than I really am. But that humility key is that I am exactly who I am. And I have a right to be here. I have a right to my shadow. I have a right to my corner of the sidewalk. And in that humility, I have done what I could do, and then I can ask my higher power to just hold on to the shame for a while. It doesn't even have to be forever. And I find that if my higher power holds on to my shame for 20 seconds or 60 seconds or 180 seconds, then usually I can move past it. And it's like nearly headless Nick, just, Harry Potter flows through the walls and then the shame's gone and I don't know where it went. So that's how I do it, but it's slow. It's hard. Um, Boy, I wish I could rewrite sections of my book. I can't do that. I have to, all I can do is write the page I'm on.
Uh, I love one of the promises, the 12-step promises. It's in the ninth step promises. Our past, we no longer wish to shut the door on our past, nor I can't remember. I'm doing a brutal job quoting it, but it's basically my past becomes one of my greatest assets. What's your take on that?
Well, that's actually shows up in A Christmas Carol, which I talked about earlier too. Um, it does become an asset because I've done a huge amount of hypothesis testing, right? I've done a huge amount of knowing what doesn't work at all. And I like it's in my 12 step. I can take that message to other people. Like, listen, you don't need to do what I did because when I tried it, I broke things. I broke myself, I broke people around me, I broke relationships and situations and because I have those experiences today, um, the more enlightened sense of being, and by enlightened, I mean letting the light in as opposed to focusing on the darkness. Um, I kind of know what to do with the light. I've got this incredible banquet now, and I get to sample it, and I'm grateful for that. And it's these rooms in this program, my higher power, that have given it to me. And I get to share it with other people. And if I hadn't had my past, I wouldn't have my present. And the future, like Ebenezer Scrooge, I would like to think that I've changed the message on my headstone somehow.
Love that. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. This next question from an anonymous attendee goes back to the thing we were talking about, how the people you were surrounded by changed. They went from, one way to another way. And the question is, are non-addicts more attractive now than addicts are, or are they more attractive to you now than they used to be?
It depends on the day, if I'm being completely honest. Listen, I'm in recovery. I'm not recovered. I'm not fully baked. If you took me out of the oven today, the cake would fall. I got to keep my program up. I got to keep doing what I'm doing. And I always will because I know what happens when I don't. So today, are they more attractive? Yeah, I think so. I think so. I don't need to live in anyone else's first step today. I have no desire to. If you took me out of the rooms, shut the heat off in the oven, I'd be back at it in 6 months' time. I would be trolling the bar at a casino looking for an addicted person to support. And and I don't ever want to do that again. And I don't have to because I'm not going to today.
Yeah, and how freeing is that to say, you know what? Yeah, I would actually be right back where I was in 6 months' time if I stopped doing what I'm doing now. Is that actually freeing to you to admit that out loud, or does that make you feel like you're still in chains or in bondage to it?
No, heck, there's no chains here. That's freedom. No, the chains is the old way. That's the chains. That's Jacob Marley. I there's no chains on this body. I am free. And if all I have to do is follow this program of recovery and make it a central part of my life, if that's all I have to do, that's awesome. Do you know how easy that is compared to the other way where I lost my mind, my heart, my body, and my soul? That's hard. This is not hard.
I love how the Christmas Carol just came back into this over and over and over again.
Well,
That's a
yeah, I'm sorry. I saw it
perfect
last night,
situation.
and it's the season, so
It
and it's
is.
not conference approved. So
And that's okay. I love, fiction is sometimes way more powerful than nonfiction, because it just helps us see things from so many different areas and angles. So before we start wrapping up here, do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
Keep coming back because it works. That's it.
Great words of wisdom. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dan, for such a powerful and fantastic Reco12 weekly speaker meeting. If anybody in there in the live audience or you out there in the podcast world have a question or would like to get in contact with Dan, please send an email to reco12pod@gmail.com. I can facilitate that. If you have questions, jump into our WhatsApp community and ask those there for our community to post back and forth our experience, strength, and hope. And if you haven't done so already, please consider going and rating and reviewing the podcast in Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you listen on either of those two platforms, it really is a powerful way to work Step 12 and get this message out to more people who are seeking a solution. Next Friday, we will be kicking off 2025 with one of my more influential mentors in recovery, Father Bill W. And his topic next week will be spiritual sobriety. And I'm really looking forward to this. So stay tuned in the WhatsApp community, get on the email list, and get the link and the information on that as we get there. All right, now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the 7th step prayer that Dan will say for us.
7th step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. And remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.